He planned a public divorce, but why did she thank him? What's missing?
What would you do if your husband slid divorce papers across the table in the middle of your anniversary dinner? Not in private. Not after a fight. Not behind closed doors where humiliation could stay contained. No, he did it under candlelight, in front of friends, in front of family, in front of people holding champagne glasses halfway to their lips. And when my husband said, "Sign these, we're done," I looked him in the eye and said, "Thank you." That was the moment the whole room went silent. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. I'm Vivian Hale, 35 years old, a corporate attorney, and until that night, everyone in that room believed they knew exactly how my marriage worked. They thought my husband Daniel Hale, 38, was the charming one, the confident one, the polished entrepreneur with the easy smile and the expensive watch and the kind of voice people trusted too quickly. They thought I was the quieter half, the composed wife, the woman who stood beside him, elegant and unreadable, while he filled the room. And to be fair, that was the version we sold them. The dinner was being held in a private room at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place with low amber lighting, velvet chairs, and waiters who moved so quietly they almost looked choreographed. It was our 10th wedding anniversary, 10 years, long enough for people to assume permanence, long enough for them to mistake routine for love and image for truth. At the table were 8 people total. Daniel's 2 closest business associates, Mark and Jason, both dressed like they had somewhere more important to be afterward. My younger sister Maya, 29, in a black dress that somehow felt too sleek for an anniversary dinner, 2 longtime friends from our social circle, and us, seated at the center like the evening's main event. Everything looked perfect. That's the thing about endings, they almost never look like endings when they begin. Earlier that night, Daniel had been performing, smiling a little too hard, tapping his fingers once against his water glass when he thought no one was looking, checking his phone under the table. Tiny fractures in the surface, tiny signs, most people would have missed them. I didn't. Because something had been wrong for months. Have you ever felt a shift in someone before you could prove it, before you could name it? Just a change in temperature, in rhythm, in the way they entered a room and didn't quite land beside you anymore? That was Daniel. He had become polished in a way that felt rehearsed. Kinder in public, colder in private. He started staying late at work more often, but somehow had less to say about work. He became protective of his phone, casual with our shared finances, distant with his attention, and oddly careful with his words. Not nervous, not guilty in the obvious way, just strategic. That was what bothered me most. Daniel wasn't drifting. He was planning. And by the time we sat down for that anniversary dinner, I already knew enough to understand one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was about to happen, he believed he was in control of it. The appetizers had barely been cleared when he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out the envelope. It was cream-colored, heavy stock, neat, prepared, not emotional, not impulsive. He placed it on the table between us and slid it over with 2 fingers, like he was delivering a check. "Sign these," he said. No warmth, no hesitation. We're done. Around us, the air changed. You could feel it. Conversations from nearby tables blurred into nothing. Mark looked down immediately. Jason froze. One of my friends inhaled sharply. The waiter standing near the wine bucket stopped moving altogether. And Maya didn't look surprised. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the papers. Not the insult. Not even Daniel's expression. Maya's face. Just for a second, before she lowered her eyes, there was no confusion there. No shock, only tension. Like she had been waiting for the line to finally be spoken aloud. That was when I smiled. Small, controlled, almost gentle. I put my hand on the envelope, looked directly at my husband, and said the last thing he expected to hear. "Thank you." Daniel blinked. Just once. But it was enough. Because in that instant, I saw it happen. The first crack in his confidence. He had expected tears, or anger, maybe pleading, maybe a scene dramatic enough to make him look justified. Instead, I gave him gratitude, calm gratitude, the kind that makes people wonder what they don't know. And suddenly, everyone at that table was no longer watching a woman get discarded. They were watching a man realize he may have miscalculated. I lifted the flap of the envelope slowly, feeling every eye on me, every heartbeat in that room pressing toward the same question. Why would a woman thank her husband for divorcing her? I looked down at the first page, and what I saw there told me this night was about to become something very different. 3 months earlier, I stopped trying to save my marriage. I started studying it. That sounds cold, doesn't it? But tell me something, what do you do when love starts feeling edited? When the man you've slept beside for 10 years still says all the right things, but every word lands half an inch away from where it should? When he kisses your cheek, but it feels like checking a box? That was Daniel in the spring. Still charming, still polished, still the same man in photographs. But in real life, he had developed a strange new talent, being present without actually being there. He'd sit across from me at breakfast, answer emails before sunrise, nod at something I said, and yet somehow never absorb a single word. He laughed a second too late. Asked questions he should have already known the answers to. Started treating our home like a hotel he respected just enough not to damage. At first, I told myself it was stress. Daniel's company had been expanding fast. New investors, new dinners, new pressure. That was the story, anyway. And for a while, I accepted it because long marriages survive on the benefit of the doubt. They almost have to. You don't make it 10 years without learning how to ignore a few strange silences. But this wasn't silence. It was design. The first red flag wasn't perfume. It wasn't lipstick. It wasn't a suspicious hotel receipt tucked into a blazer pocket like some cheap movie cliche. No, Daniel was too careful for that. The first red flag was financial. I noticed a transfer from our joint account that didn't fit any pattern we'd ever had before. Not huge enough to trigger immediate alarm, just annoying enough to stand out to someone like me. A consulting expense routed through one of his business entities, then another, then a larger one 2 weeks later, labeled vaguely enough to invite no questions from anyone who didn't know how to read around language. I did. I didn't bring it up. That's important. Because people think intelligence always looks active, aggressive, confrontational. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes intelligence is silence. Sometimes it's waiting long enough for people to show you the shape of their deception. So I waited. And I watched. Daniel started protecting his phone in little ways that would have seemed ridiculous if they hadn't been so consistent. Screen face down, device suddenly charging on his side of the bed instead of the kitchen counter. Bathroom trips that lasted long enough for entire text conversations. He even changed his lock screen from a photo of us in Lisbon to some abstract black and gold image that looked like a luxury brand campaign. That one almost made me laugh. Then there was the gym. Daniel had never cared about fitness beyond the basic vanity expected of a man in his world. But suddenly, he was going 5 mornings a week, buying fitted shirts, switching colognes, getting haircuts every 10 days instead of every month. Reinvention, that's what it looked like. The kind people mistake for self-improvement when it's actually preparation. And then there was Maya. My sister had always been woven into our life in a way that felt natural. She was younger than me by 6 years, bright and socially agile, the kind of woman who could make strangers feel like old friends in under 5 minutes. Daniel had always gotten along with her. Why wouldn't he? She was family. But family has rhythms, familiar ones, predictable ones. And Maya's rhythm changed too. She started texting me more often, but not warmly curiously, asking where I was, whether Daniel had made it home yet, whether I was still planning to attend certain events. Questions that felt casual until you line them up side by side. Then they felt less like concern and more like mapping. At dinner one Sunday, I caught her watching Daniel when she thought no one noticed. Not openly, not foolishly, just one of those glances that lasts a fraction too long. Then she looked away and smiled at me like nothing had happened. Did I confront her? No. Because by then, suspicion had started hardening into something more useful. Method. I began keeping copies of everything. Account statements, calendar changes, screenshots of transfer records. I made notes after conversations, logged dates, tracked gaps, and built timelines in my head the same way I would have for a case file. Not because I wanted to believe the worst, because I no longer had the luxury of believing the best. And still, even then, there was a part of me that wanted to be wrong. Not about Daniel, about Maya. That part died on a Thursday night. Daniel had left his phone on the kitchen island while he stepped outside to take a call. It buzzed once, just once. I looked down without touching it. A message preview lit the screen. She doesn't know yet. And above it, the sender's name. Maya. I didn't gasp. I didn't drop the phone. I didn't storm outside. I just stood there, staring at those 3 words, feeling the entire architecture of my life rearrange itself in absolute silence. Because betrayal is one thing. Betrayal with your sister? That hits differently. And in that moment, I knew this story was much worse than I had imagined. What I didn't know yet was just how far back it went. The betrayal wasn't the message. It was the timeline. Because once you see the first crack, you can't unsee the structure around it. And I didn't stop at that text. I couldn't, not anymore. 3 words had already told me enough to know I wasn't dealing with a moment of weakness. I was dealing with something deliberate, something sustained. So I stopped guessing, and I started digging. Have you ever gone looking for the truth when a part of you already knows it's going to hurt? Not in a vague way, not in a this might be bad way, but in a precise, almost clinical certainty that whatever you find is going to change how you see people forever? That was me the next morning. Daniel had synced his phone to our home system months ago. Convenience, he'd called it. Seamless integration, shared calendars, shared access. The kind of modern marriage detail that looks harmless until it isn't. He forgot one thing. I understand systems better than he does. Emails, backups, hidden folders most people never think to check. It didn't take long. It never does when someone believes they're smarter than the person they're hiding from. What I found wasn't chaos. It was organized. Threads of communication stretching back months, carefully spaced, strategically timed, messages that never said too much in one place, but said everything when viewed together. Maya wasn't just involved. She was consistent. At first, the tone was ambiguous, light, playful, the kind of conversation that could still be explained away if you were desperate enough to explain it. Inside jokes, late-night check-ins. Did you get home safe? Messages that didn't belong between a man and his wife's sister. Then the language shifted. Gradually, smoothly, like they had both agreed not to rush it, not to make it obvious, even to themselves. There were gaps in the conversation where I knew they were seeing each other in person. You could feel it in the silence. In the way messages picked back up mid-thought, like a conversation that had already happened somewhere else. And then I found the confirmation. A photo. Not explicit, not reckless. Just the 2 of them reflected faintly in a restaurant window, sitting too close, angled toward each other in a way that erased any remaining doubt. His hand on the table, hers just barely touching it. Intimate enough? Intentional enough. Real. I stared at that image longer than I expected to. Not because I needed proof anymore, but because my brain was trying to reconcile 2 timelines at once. The one I had lived, and the one they had built behind it. Family dinners, holidays, birthdays, all of it overlapped. And suddenly, every memory had a shadow. But here's where it got worse. This wasn't just emotional, it wasn't even just physical. It was strategic. I followed the financial trail next. Those consulting payments, they weren't random. They were routed through an LLC I didn't recognize at first until I traced it back. Maya's name wasn't directly on it. But her business partner's was a proxy. Clean enough to avoid casual detection, sloppy enough that someone like me could still connect the dots. Daniel had been moving money. Not just spending it, positioning it. Shifting assets out of our shared visibility into channels that would be difficult to challenge if I walked into a divorce unprepared. Layered transactions, gradual transfers, nothing explosive. Just enough to build a separate financial foundation quietly. And then it clicked. The message? She doesn't know yet. Of course I didn't. Because this wasn't about leaving me. This was about outmaneuvering me. Do you see the difference? Leaving is emotional. This was calculated. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, and for the first time since this began, I stopped feeling like a wife entirely. I started thinking like an attorney. I didn't confront them. Not him, not her, because confrontation would have given them something they didn't deserve time to adjust. Instead, I made 2 calls. The first was to a private investigator I had worked with on a corporate case 2 years earlier. Discreet, thorough, expensive enough to be effective. The second was to a colleague, Rachel Lynn, 42, one of the most precise family law attorneys I knew. Not emotional, not easily impressed. The kind of woman who didn't react to betrayal stories, she dismantled them. I gave her a simple version of the situation. She gave me a simpler answer. Do nothing publicly, she said, and document everything. So that's exactly what I did. Weeks passed. And while Daniel thought he was building an exit, I was building a case. The investigators' reports came in layers. Photos, logs, confirmations of meetings, financial cross-references, even recorded snippets of conversation in public spaces. Nothing illegal, just enough to establish pattern and intent. And then, one afternoon, the final report landed in my inbox. I opened it slowly, carefully. Page after page, everything aligned into a single, undeniable conclusion. Daniel wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to leave me with almost nothing. I closed the file, sat there for a long moment. Then I did the only thing that made sense. I accepted the anniversary dinner invitation he had just sent out to our entire circle, because suddenly, I understood exactly what that night was going to be. The dinner wasn't his stage. It was mine. By the time I unfolded the first page of those divorce papers, I already knew what they would say. Not word for word, but close enough. Aggressive asset division, strategic omissions. Language designed to corner me into reacting quickly, emotionally, and without legal footing. Daniel had always underestimated one thing about me. I don't react. I prepare. The paper felt smooth between my fingers. Expensive in that way legal documents often are when someone wants to project authority. I let my eyes scan just enough lines to confirm what I already suspected. He was trying to strip me clean, limit my claims, reframe shared assets, position certain accounts as non-marital. It was bold, calculated, and if I had been even slightly less informed, it might have worked. Around me, the room was still holding its breath. You could feel it pressing in from all sides. The tension wasn't loud, it was heavy, like everyone instinctively understood they were witnessing something they weren't supposed to see this closely. I placed the papers back into the envelope, calmly, carefully. Then I looked up at Daniel. Did your lawyer draft this? I asked, my voice even, almost conversational, or did you? That got his attention. His jaw tightened just slightly, not enough for most people to notice, but I did. My lawyer handled it, he said. It's straightforward. Straightforward. That word almost made me smile again. Because nothing about this was straightforward. Not the affair. Not the money. And definitely not what was about to happen next. Across the table, Maya still wasn't looking at me. Her fingers were wrapped tightly around her wine glass, knuckles faintly pale. She hadn't touched the drink in minutes. Guilt has a posture. And hers was collapsing inward. Daniel, on the other hand, was starting to shift. Not physically, not yet, but mentally. You could see it in the way his eyes kept searching my face for something. Anger, hurt, confusion. Anything he could use. But I wasn't giving him anything. That was the part he hadn't planned for. Vivian, he said, lowering his voice slightly, leaning forward just enough to suggest control. There's no need to drag this out. We can handle it like adults. Like adults. In front of an audience, he invited. Interesting choice. I nodded slowly, as if considering his words. Then I reached down beside my chair and picked up my bag. Small movement. But it shifted the energy immediately. Because now, people were leaning in, not away. Curiosity had replaced discomfort. And Daniel felt it. What are you doing? He asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened my bag and took out my own envelope. Thinner, simpler, but far more dangerous. I placed it gently on the table between us, aligning it perfectly with the edge of his. Then I slid it toward him. A mirror of what he had done just moments earlier. You should read mine first, I said. Silence. Real silence this time. The kind that doesn't just fill a room, it freezes it. Daniel didn't move immediately. And that was the first real crack. Because confident men don't hesitate, but uncertain ones do. What is this? He asked, his voice quieter now, not sharp, not commanding, just cautious. Go ahead, I said. He glanced briefly around the table, as if suddenly aware of the audience he had created. Mark avoided eye contact. Jason shifted in his seat. One of my friends subtly leaned forward, unable to hide her curiosity anymore. And Maya? Maya finally looked up, right at Daniel. Not at me. At him, and in her expression, for just a second, there it was. Fear. That was all it took. Daniel picked up the envelope, opened it, pulled out the documents, and as his eyes began to move across the first page, everything about him changed. It wasn't dramatic at first. Just a flicker. Confusion. Then a pause. A longer one. His posture stiffened. His grip on the paper tightened slightly. His eyes moved faster now, scanning instead of reading. Processing. Failing to process. Then came the shift he couldn't hide. Color drained just enough to notice if you were paying attention. And everyone was paying attention now. No one spoke. No one moved. Because whatever was in that envelope, it wasn't what he expected. I leaned back slightly in my chair, watching him the same way he had planned to watch me. Patiently. Carefully. Precisely. And for the first time that night, Daniel looked like a man who realized he had made a mistake. A serious one. He flipped to the next page. Then the next. Faster now. More urgently. His lips parted slightly, like he was about to say something but nothing came out. Not yet. Because he hadn't reached the worst part. Not yet. And I knew exactly which page would do it. I watched his eyes land there. And stop completely. That was the moment. The exact second everything shifted beyond recovery. He looked up at me. Not confident. Not controlled. But shaken. And finally understanding that this dinner was never his move to begin with. What was on that page? Everything. Not rumors. Not suspicions. Not emotional accusations that could be twisted or dismissed. Evidence. Clean. Structured. Timelined evidence. Daniel's eyes were locked on the document, but I could already see the moment it clicked for him, the exact second he understood this wasn't a reaction. This was a response. Calculated, prepared, executed. You already filed, he said quietly, almost to himself. Not a question. A realization. I nodded once, 3 weeks ago. That was the first layer. The legal petition sitting right there in his hands, stamped and processed, initiated by me, not him. Which meant everything he thought he was controlling, timing, narrative, leverage, was already gone. But that wasn't the part that broke him. He turned the page again. Slower this time. And now, he was reading carefully. Because the next section didn't just end a marriage. It exposed him. I documented all financial transfers from our joint accounts over the last 6 months, I said calmly, my voice carrying just enough for the table to hear. Including the ones routed through the LLC connected to Maya's associate. A ripple moved through the room. Subtle, but real. Mark leaned back. Jason's expression shifted from discomfort to quiet calculation. One of my friends covered her mouth, eyes flicking between Daniel and Maya. And Maya? She looked like she might stop breathing. Daniel's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. That was his last attempt at control. Denial. Predictable. I slid a single sheet out from my envelope and placed it beside his glass. Page 6, I said. He didn't want to look. That much was obvious. But he did. Because now he had to. His eyes moved across the document again, slower this time, and I watched the exact moment the resistance left his body. Not completely, but enough. Because there it was. The account numbers, the transaction chains, the connection. Not assumed. Proven. And just to simplify things, I added, my tone almost conversational, the prenup clause you insisted on adding 5 years ago, that got his attention immediately. He looked up, sharp, alert, too late. It activates under financial misconduct and infidelity, I continued, both of which are now documented. Silence. Not tense this time. Final. Because that clause, it didn't just protect assets. It reversed them. Everything Daniel had tried to move out of reach was now under legal scrutiny, potentially recoverable, potentially frozen. And Maya? She wasn't just the other woman anymore. She was involved. Legally. That was the part she hadn't planned for. I didn't, she started, her voice breaking slightly, but she stopped herself before finishing the sentence. because there was no version of that sentence that would help her. Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time all night, they weren't aligned. They were exposed. "You set me up," he said, his voice low, controlled but hollow. I shook my head once. "No," I said, "you did that yourself. I just paid attention." That was the emotional shift. Not anger, not revenge. Clarity. Around us, the room was no longer frozen. It was shifting. People were recalibrating in real time, reassessing everything they thought they understood about us, about him, about me. Because moments like this don't just reveal truth. They redistribute power. Dinner didn't continue. It couldn't. Mark was the first to stand, muttering something about an early meeting. Jason followed shortly after, but not before giving Daniel a look that said more than words ever could distance, already forming. My friends stayed seated a moment longer, stunned, before quietly gathering their things. Maya left quickly. No dramatic exit, no confrontation, just gone. And Daniel? He stayed sitting across from me, the papers still in his hands, like if he didn't move, none of this would fully land. But it already had. "Vivian," he started. I stood, not abruptly, not emotionally, just finished. "My lawyer will be in contact," I said. And that was it. No scene. No raised voices. No collapse. Just conclusion. The next morning was quiet. Not heavy. Not painful. Quiet in a way that felt precise. I woke up in a different place, not temporary, not reactive. A property I had secured weeks earlier, already furnished, already mine, clean lines, minimal noise, no shared history in the walls. Sunlight came in through wide windows, steady and indifferent. My phone had notifications. Missed calls from Daniel. 2 messages from unknown numbers. One from Maya. I didn't open any of them, because there was nothing left to understand. Legally, things moved exactly the way Rachel said they would. Fast. Decisive. Daniel's accounts were flagged for review. Several transfers frozen pending investigation. The LLC trail unraveled quicker than he expected once formal scrutiny was applied. What he built quietly came apart just as efficiently. The prenup clause held. Completely. Which meant his attempt to minimize my position did the opposite. Assets were rebalanced. In my favor, Maya faced her own consequences. Not just socially, though, that happened immediately. Silence from friends, invitations disappearing, questions she couldn't answer. But legally as well. Involvement, even indirect, leaves traces. And traces become problems. As for Daniel, control was the thing he lost first. Then reputation. Then options, not all at once, but steadily, predictably, the same way he had planned everything else. A week later, I sat by the window with a cup of coffee reviewing the final documents. Signed, processed, complete, no loose ends, no unanswered questions, no lingering leverage, just closure. Clean and exact. My phone buzzed again. Another message from him. I looked at the screen for a moment, then deleted it. Without opening, outside, the city moved the same way it always does, unaware, uninterrupted, indifferent to personal collapses happening behind glass and walls. And for the first time in months, everything felt aligned again. Not repaired. Not restored. Resolved. I leaned back slightly, letting the silence settle around me, not empty, but earned. Because in the end, he didn't end the marriage that night. He revealed it. And by morning, I was already gone.
So, was this revenge or strategy? And did she already know everything all along?